This is part 2 of the 7.05 lesson, New Industries Emerge. And we were on page 493 of the reading in the last paragraph. Carnegie and Frick were two of the most powerful industrialists in America. They did not always see eye to eye. Is that what it's going to say? Get along well. Frick was a ruthless businessman whose workers despised him for his harsh tactics. His toughness served him well when an assassin broke into his office and tried to kill him. Frick was shot twice and stabbed, but he managed to tackle the man and survive. As a businessman, Carnegie could be as ruthless as Frick. He would push to reduce the cost of producing a ton of steel by even a penny. He succeeded in making the finest, strongest steel in the world and selling it at a price so low that his competitors could not match it. Carnegie used a business strategy called horizontal integration, acquiring competing businesses and merging them into one corporation. He drove other steelmakers out of business and eventually established a monopoly. When his was the only steel company still standing, he raised prices and customers had no choice but to pay the higher rate. By 1900, Carnegie Steel Company was producing 4 million tons of steel and making profits of 40 million a year. Rockefeller and oil. So now we're going to read about the same kind of story, but now with oil. In 1859, a group of men dug a well in Titusville, Pennsylvania, hoping to extract some of the black. Here's a picture of the oil wells there in Pennsylvania. Hoping to extract some of the black, flammable liquid that oozed out of the ground. They wanted to sell it as a lubricant in place of animal fat and for lighting in place of candles and whale oil. Within weeks, an oil rush began that would become as big as the California gold rush before the Civil War. The oil was taken to Cleveland, Ohio, and other places to be refined. Refining is a process of heating oil to purify it. Products like kerosene can be separated out because they vaporize at different temperatures. One of the Cleveland refineries had been opened by a group of business partners that included John D. Rockefeller. The son of a patent medicine salesman, Rockefeller had gone to work in Cleveland as a bookkeeper in 1855 when he was 16. By the time he was 20, he was one of the city's most successful young businessmen. Once he got involved in the oil refineries, he resolved to get control of every possible part of the oil business. Rockefeller built his oil empire through both horizontal and vertical integration. He integrated horizontally by buying the most important oil refineries in Pennsylvania, Ohio, and New York, thereby eliminating his competition. He integrated vertically by controlling not only the railroads and pipelines that moved oil to its buyers, but also the companies that made and sold final products like lubricating oil and gasoline. He even produced his own barrels of wood from forests owned by his company, Standard Oil. By controlling the cost of transporting and finishing his product, Rockefeller was in a position to set the supply and price of petroleum products in most of the country. He built an empire that included a monopoly of both the railroads and the pipelines between Pennsylvania and Cleveland. The Standard Oil Trust. A corporation had to be chartered by an individual estate, and each state had its own laws and regulations. Rockefeller, however, wanted to create a national conglomerate with unified direction for all his various businesses, so he organized a trust. The law allowed individuals to set up trusts so that a person could be entrusted with controlling someone else's property. For example, an adult might be appointed to control property inherited by a very young child. In business, however, a group of companies, agreed to be supervised by a single set of directors or trustees. In setting up a trust, the goal was to control or eliminate competition, in other words, to achieve a monopoly. In creating the Standard Oil Trust and setting himself up as chairman of the trustees, Rockefeller built the biggest business the nation had ever seen. By 1879, Standard Oil controlled 90% of oil refining in the United States. The monopoly Rockefeller assembled effectively eliminated all competition in the oil market. He fully controlled the production and transportation of refined petroleum. Though critics charged that he had too much power over the supply and price of oil, others argued he had brought order in the lower prices to a chaotic industry. Rockefeller controlled the oil industry until the early 20th century, when new oil fields were discovered in Texas and California, just in time to feed a new major invention, the automobile. And here's a political cartoon about Rockefeller's oil empire. The monopoly showing as a octopus squeezing all the other industries in their control. J.P. Morgan and banking, another one of our captains of industry now in the banking area. One reason for the success of these new mammoth business enterprises was John Pierpont Morgan. The son of a Connecticut baker, Morgan was born in 1837, educated in Europe. In 1871, he joined with several partners to form an investment banking firm. As an investment banker, J.P. Morgan channeled funds into buying large amounts of company stocks and bonds, which he would then sell at a profit. His investments helped companies grow into large corporations. Because his profits depended on the well-being of the companies in which his banking firm invested, Morgan took an active interest in the operations of these companies. He tried to eliminate corruption and bring good management practices to the business of railroading, such as regular investment in improvements to trains and lines. Like Rockefeller, he saw competition as inefficient and wasteful and worked to merge firms into larger trusts. Morgan's greatest triumph with railroads came in 1885 when the New York Central and the Pennsylvania lines got into a potentially ruinous race. Both companies were building very expensive routes across Pennsylvania and New York, each hoping to put each other out of business. Morgan invited the top executives of the two lines aboard his yacht. In a day-long cruise on the Hudson River, he worked out a peace deal between them. The two railroads paid Morgan handsomely for his day's work. Morgan's most extraordinary deal, however, came in 1901 when he engineered the purchase of Andrew Carnegie's steelmaking empire. He quickly proceeded to acquire smaller steel companies as well as iron ore mines and a shipping firm to create the first billion-dollar corporation, United States Steel. At the turn of the century, Morgan reigned as the most powerful banker in the world. These men of this time, it's amazing the wealth and prosperity they had. And that's why it's called the Gilded Age. In 1873, the marvelous Mark Twain, along with his friend, writer and editor Charles Dudley Warner, published The Gilded Age, a satirical tale of the fever to get rich quick through land speculation, along with related corruption and ambition in Washington, D.C. The title became a nickname for the years between the end of the Civil War and the close of the 19th century, marked by greed and political corruption, as well as a new class of the super rich with their extravagant displays of wealth. And gilded is an important word to kind of know what it really means. It's something that's gilded with gold. It looks good on the outside because it's gold, but if you look underneath, it could be tarnished or rusted. So that kind of shows that, yes, it looks gold, because some people were becoming extraordinarily rich and prosperous off these new businesses, but underneath those layers of that gilded gold, there were other people that were paying the price, and we'll learn about that in the upcoming lessons. Industry in the South. All right, should we stop here? Let me just check if we should stop or keep reading on. Okay, we're going to finish reading this last part in this page, and then the next lesson will start the Age of Invention. Industry in the South. After the Civil War, much of the energy that might have gone into industrial development in the South was consumed by conflict over Reconstruction. But the South's resources did create some opportunities. Cotton remained king. The number of cotton mills grew from 161 in 1880 to 400 in 1900. In 1871, a group of developers selected an area in Alabama rich with the minerals needed for iron manufacturing. There they built a town and named it Birmingham, after England's great iron-producing city. Alabama's Birmingham soon became a steel-making center famous as the Pittsburgh of the South. The great captain of industry in the South was James P. Duke, the son of a North Carolina tobacco farmer. Looking for a new way to expand the appeal of his crop, Duke focused on a growing popular fad, the cigarette, a pre-packed roll of tobacco lighter than a cigar and easier to smoke than a pipe. After the invention of a way to roll cigarettes by machine, Duke dominated the tobacco business. He was soon selling billions of cigarettes per year. By the turn of the century, his American Tobacco Company had put most other cigarette manufacturers out of business. Some enterprising Southerners hoped their region would take further steps to modernize. Henry Grady, editor of the Atlanta Constitution, declared the beginnings of a new South that stands upright, full-statured, and equal among the people of the earth. Despite some progress, the South in the late 19th century remained a largely impoverished area that mainly provided raw materials to be exported or made into finished goods up north. So let's go back to our lesson 5. And the other portion was complete the Steel Yourself virtual field trip. And you can take off and look at some of the railroad history and building the Transcontinental Railroad. You can do that on your own. Here's a little tidbit. On May 10th, 1869, the final golden spike was driven at Promontory Point Summit, Utah, connecting the two sections of the Transcontinental Railroad. Actually, there were 3 4 commemorative spikes. The other 2 you can read here to find out. Growing business. Railroads not the only industries under construction. Steel and oil were also growing. Visit the history of U.S. Steel to learn about the history of the steel industry and see some of the giants that helped it grow. You've heard of Andrew Carnegie and J.P. Morgan in your reading. Charles Schwab's name continues to be business headlines today. But who was the other guy and what did he do for U.S. Steel? John D. Rockefeller Sr.'s monopoly over the oil industry, Standard Oil Trust, was ultimately brought down through the efforts of journalist Ida M. Tarbell. And we'll read more about Ida Tarbell in the next semester. Okay, now is your turn to create a monopoly. And then here's an activity you can do and see if you can accumulate wealth and develop a monopoly. And there's an optional activity if you want to learn more about the Transcontinental Railroad. But when you are done with all the rest of the activities for this lesson, make sure that you go and complete the 7.05 checkpoint. As always, if it's a checkpoint, you get to use your reading guide to complete the checkpoint for this lesson. Good luck on your checkpoint.